This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by The Lightning of Possible Storms, a short story collection that reads like a novel. Capitalism is going to murder his boss. Check it out at possiblestorms.com or anywhere books are sold.
Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how a genre gets made. I have with me today my two regular co-hosts as well as a special guest. So with me today are Justin Curry, also known as Chasing Artwork, Dan Vadeboncoeur, our producer and Tech About Town fellow, and Jonathan Ball, the author of The Lightning of Possible Storms. Thanks for coming, Jonathan.
Oh, you're welcome. You've also got probably the noise of my kids in the background as special guests as well.
That's just the sound effects of a working author. That's all that is.
Yeah. A working from home author.
I want to jump right in and put you on the spot, John, if that's okay.
I'd love it. I'd love to be put on the spot.
All right. So The Lightning of Possible Storms is a very peculiar book, which Quill and Quire calls, and I'll quote here, an impressive clockwork construction of narrative cogs and gears that never lose sight of either its humanity or its nature as a manufactured work of art. Can you tell us what the hell they're talking about?
Well, what they're talking about is The Lightning of Possible Storms is a short story book, ostensibly. It contains a series of stories about but also all these stories are about wildly varying topics. One is, a character who is the personification of capitalism, trying to win a contest at work. Another is a woman who is dreaming about living in this palace of ice while her body strips away because of her anorexia is kind of taking hold again. Another story is about, a woman whose husband is dying of cancer. Another story is just about kids trying to kill some caterpillars. It's extremely various in terms of its story content. They shift genres. There's sci-fi stories. There's kind of quote unquote literary realism. There's all sorts of strange surrealist or experimental stories. But then at the same time, they are all sort of, despite being very disparate, they're very connected in the sense that we have this thread, almost like a novel. It kind of reads like a novel, even though it's a short story book, and even though the stories are very different, because there's this kind of overarching story with this woman, Aaliyah, who is basically being gifted a book. She opens it up, she sees this been dedicated to her, and is kind of disturbed by this because she barely knows at all the person who wrote this book, and as she kind of is reading through it, and as we're sort of reading through it with her, stranger and stranger things start to sort of be happening around her, and her reality starts to kind of change and disintegrate in certain ways. So it has a sort of the thrust of a novel. I want to do a short story book that has the kind of thrust of a novel, if that makes sense.
So I have a question about that. It reads like a novel. If you don't know any better, you would kind of open the book on the first page and read through this like framing device you have where someone finds a book and then reads inside the book, and they kind of, it's about them and dedicated to them, but not really about them. And then the stories are kind of tangentially related to like their own feelings. Which came first, the concept of this framing device, or did you have these stories and then you said, oh, people have trouble getting into short story collections. How do I'm interested to know how that thing came about because of the following facts. It is almost impossible to place a short story collection in the publishing world these days. So you've already done the impossible. And was it because of this device that you used?
Well, there's I'll try to kind of condense the answer to this question, because I started writing this. So initially, it was a bunch of different stories that I was writing separately. And I started, the oldest of these stories is the caterpillar one I was referring to, which I wrote in 2001. So, it's 2020 now. So about, almost 20 years ago there, I wrote the first of these stories. Subsequently, I wrote, stories over the years. So initially I was sort of compiling my best stories, right? And then trying to think maybe I'll write some newer stories as well and get a short story collection together. But I was having a couple problems with doing that. I wasn't really getting into the marketing question of it, although I knew, of course, like you were saying, that it was going to be a marketing nightmare to try to just get a publisher to take this book because it was a short story book. But even before getting to that point, I just was kind of frustrated because I don't like short story books, although in a certain sense.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to interrupt you there. Why don't you like short story? I personally love short story collections, and I think Justin also likes short story collections.
I love short stories, but I don't like short story collections because to me, there's very little reason they should be in the same book so often. I like books. Like what I see myself as a person who's doing is I'm trying to write a book. So when I had a bunch of short stories, I was like, well, these are a bunch of short stories. I could put them in a book, but why? Why not just put them in a cardboard box? Why not to put them in a website? There's no reason for them to be in a book. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like the technology of the book is, to me, a bad place for a bunch of short stories that don't connect. So I wanted them to connect. But the problem with just a themed short story collection was, one, I didn't want to have a bunch of stories on the same theme. I didn't want to have a bunch of short stories in the same genre even, because I wanted a book of that short stories that was, so to me, it was like solving. So I want to throw this question back with you a little bit, but just to close out the answer, to me, it was a formal problem I was trying to solve. How do I have a short story book where the stories are very different in content, they're very different in genre and form, and it still hangs together like a book? And then the other frustration I have with short story books is I don't find myself finishing them. Like I'll read one story, I'll read another story. I love it. I love short stories, but I don't see like a build throughout the book. And I wanted to build throughout the book the way like a novel has. So I wanted to get to the end and the pace is faster, even though you're reading different stories with different, totally different characters and everything. So to me, it was a way of trying to solve this problem that I kind of was feeling I had, which was I wanted a bunch of different stories that had no real similarities at all. Plus, I wanted to have a build throughout the book, and I wanted it to feel like a unit, like a whole single unit, even though it was, I wanted to have my cake and eat it too in a basic way. So to me, this is what writing is. It's about coming up with the problem that I want to solve. And then I'm trying to figure out, well, what's the way that other people have solved it? What's the way that, I haven't seen someone try to solve it? What's something I haven't seen people do? And why haven't they done it? What's the problem there? How can I resolve the problem? So I'm a very process-driven writer in that sense, that everything I'm kind of doing is very much just to sort of solve a process problem or to follow through on a process I want to kind of, yield some result. And so I'm curious with you guys to hear you talk a little bit about your process. And you do talk about your process a lot in this podcast, because I listen to this podcast all the time. But of course, you're usually talking about your process as illustrators and visual artists. So I'm kind of curious with the two of you. With you, Gregory, I know recently have a book out, The Automatic Age, where it's primarily a prose work, and although you do have some illustration in it. And I know Justin is starting to delve into stealing your idea, as as basically all of us are kind of looking at this thing you're doing and trying to get into how do we get a really interesting that format you got there of a sort of slim novella sized prose work, but with these illustrations that are not necessarily illustrative, but are really part of the story. I'm really curious about that, how you kind of settled on that, since it isn't a thing you're known for.
So number one, about format, Automatic Age is, just about 100 pages long with prose and illustration intermixed. And what I wanted was single serving stories where you could read it in one sitting, where you could say, I wonder if this is what he meant by that, or that is what he meant by that. And it wouldn't be such an endeavor to read it again and find out. Easy to revisit because the cost of your time is low if your attention is high. And the pictures and the illustrations give you a place to say, that's the part I want to revisit. It's my favorite thing about looking at old comics. When I go through my old comic collection, I'll be like, oh yeah, that issue. I remember that issue. I'll pull it out of sequence and I'll reread just a single issue that I really liked or enjoyed. And I always wished that there was sort of a novel equivalent to that. And so this is kind of how that sort of metabolized into some other form for me. You were going to say something, I think, Dan.
To me, what this is about is the definition or difference between what a short story is and what a novella is, possibly.
Yes.
Because I don't know that you have, traditionally novellas don't have chapters, but you do have chapters in the Automatic Age.
I do, because I have narrative breaks,
Right.
which just kind of lend themselves to being places where you could put a chapter title. That would be thematic. That would also be a clue to people what was coming. What I did in Automatic Age is I tried to make each chapter title a bit of a MacGuffin. Like, it tells you what the chapter is called, but if you've read the chapter, it's also a nudge, nudge, wink, wink to a secret within the chapter. It's like the chapter titles are super spoilers, but not until you've read them.
Something in there, huh? Something shiny.
Well, and I think this is a great place to bring up one of your projects, Justin, which is a title that I love so much, When My Bones Burn, which you're working on.
While
right
my
now.
bones burn.
While? Not when?
While my bones
I liked
burn.
it better as when.
When my bones
No, because it's happening. It's still happening.
No, I'm just kidding.
While my
While my
the
bones
story
burn.
is happening while his bones are burning.
It's
so
the bones
it's
burning
present
part.
tense.
Yeah, and the present tense that to me I find so interesting, and it's going to be one of those stories where it means two things. So this is a great thing. Now, Justin, for the dear listener that's maybe tuning in for this first episode, he's got lots of books under his belt as an illustrator and a co-author, but he's delved into the deep end of madness, which is to write a book that has more words than pictures. So what's that process been like for you, Justin?
I find it reminds me of like when I haven't done much traditional drawing in a while and I get back into it. I'm always so rough at the beginning, but after a couple days of practice, it gets easier and you get just like huge leaps and bounds. You're getting better. And same with like writing. It kind of started because I was doing a bunch of copywriting for the Dragon Nanny Kickstarter campaign, like the back matter of the book and all the stuff that was going to be on the Kickstarter campaign. And so I was writing every morning. And so to kind of just, when I hit like a bit of a block with that, I'd jump over to this other writing project about like basically child soldiers and robots and mechs, of course.
Of course.
And so
Listen,
again,
if you have something you do well, you just keep doing it.
just keep doing it. Like those first couple of days of writing, like I don't think any of that's gonna stick around to be in the final project. But like by week 2, like week 3, you're getting into that zone. And right now I'm just kind of throwing scenes out there, right? I'm just kind of like picking little parts of the book here and there and writing and just seeing how that could connect, or if that's going to work, or if that's going to fit in.
No, there's a good analogy here that applies to you more, say, than Jonathan, Justin, because you, when you work on books, I've seen the number of storyboards that come early in a project that are discarded, and you have no trouble doing what most novelists call killing their darlings. Like, you come up with a bunch of cool things and you're like, oh, that doesn't work, so you just start over again. So it sounds like what you're talking about, maybe you don't even realize what you're doing is just doing that early storyboarding in your own project. And with novelists, what happens with most people who don't finish, they get to the end of that first part, which you and I would recognize as the early storyboards of an illustration project, and they say, oh, it's no good, and they start over or they just quit. Right? And I think that you are going to be a really interesting case to watch develop, because you have all this great habits of, oh, that's not working, I'll start again, in all your other projects. I can't wait to see that applied to prose.
Well, what writers should do is storyboard and outline and plan things and try things. I always have this thing when I teach writing. I'll have people, invariably at some point, somebody will come up to me and they'll say, I'm stuck on this story. I just don't know what these characters should do next. They just robbed the bank. I know later on they're going to have to, have a big, one's going to betray the other, but I just don't know how to kind of get from point A to point C, I'm stuck. I'm trying to write point B. And I'll say to them, look, the solution is simple. Don't write point B.
Yeah.
Just write point C instead. And then later on, then work backwards. Or write 5 point Bs. Write some different versions. See which one works better. They'll say some things like that to me. They're like, I don't know if this guy should live or die or, this, that. I'm like, well, write all those versions and then see which one you like better. Writers often don't think of things like that because they're trained out of it. They're trained into this weird one. They often believe they need to write linearly, which like you can or you can't. But there's no reason you have to write linearly.
Or if they've come out of a university academic system, they're used to there being one right answer, and if it's wrong, then you've failed, and there's no point in going on.
They have this model in their heads, this inspiration. Like they have to have a good idea. They have to have, they have to know. They feel like they should know what the characters are supposed to do next. Well, why would they have? But why? Why would they ever know that? Unless they thought about it and planned it.
This is why I think novels should have that back of the book section where it shows kind of like outtakes and scrapped bits and pieces.
But you know why they don't do that, Justin? Because the whole industry is structured around convincing that people are geniuses. And you should buy their genius
They wrote
book.
it perfectly the first time.
Yeah,
right?
But we're not geniuses.
It's my pet peeve about writing and publishing as an industry is that there is an investment, whether people realize it or not. They have an investment in perpetuating this idea that some people just have all this talent.
Yeah, and that's hurtful to an industry, I think, ultimately.
I think it's in the long run, it's hurtful. I think on a simple practical level, it's hurtful because nobody values the skill in monetarily.
Yeah, imagine like the same attitude applied to, say, your local mechanic, right? If mechanics were marketed the same way, like, oh, they never have to practice, they never have to take it apart more than once, they always get it right the first time, you'd never believe it. But somehow we believe it when it comes to Marvel.
It would be just like, you're right, and it'd be just like the publishing industry. You'd have one mechanic who makes $1 billion, and every other mechanic would be poor because nobody would believe they could fix their car.
Jonathan, do you think that it seems to me that that formula that you're talking about would discourage people from becoming writers?
I think it does.
Yeah.
But it also encourages people who believe they're geniuses with no proof to send manuscripts to publishers.
Or to tell you, you know what, guys? I've got a great idea.
Oh my goodness!
I just need you to. How many emails do you get like that in a week?
A few a month.
Gregory gets
now.
a lot.
I used to get hundreds a month.
How about you, Justin?
They were always in person at shows. I don't get too many people reaching out.
I have a great idea for a graphic novel, Justin. All I need you to do is the art. Like, design the world and the characters and the beats and the page turns and the environments and the emotional core. That's all I need you to do, Justin. But I have a great idea that's going to make us both rich. Do you mind working for free, Justin, until we're both rich?
When I teach writing, the first thing that I do is I tell them, look, you got to understand ideas are worthless. They're literally worthless in this legal sense that they have no value. They can't even be copyrighted because they're so worthless. So get off the train of thinking, one, your ideas are great, or two, I suck because I have no good ideas.
Stan, don't you think you were, well, a little hard on him?
You see that crap? All that horror crap? Things coming out of crates and eating people? Dead people coming back to life? People turning into weeds, for Christ's sake?
Okay, I have a specific question for everyone in the room here who's ever done any writing, and that is this. How do you decide between what characters say and what information is in exposition?
I don't write exposition if I can help it.
You do too. I'm reading your book.
I try to avoid as much as possible. Like there's like 5 things you can write if you're writing prose, right? And so one of them is exposition. I broadly speaking try to avoid exposition if at all possible, and just get the information across in dialogue or action. That's not always the case.
I've misspoke then. What I mean by exposition is anything that is not character dialogue. I sort of wrap that all up the same way the comics do into expositional text, right? It could be action, it could be plot driven, it could be that. Yeah, it could be description. Any of that I consider to be outside of what characters are saying to be exposition. So you're right, it's more varied than that. So let me be more specific then. How do you decide what characters say
And don't say.
and don't say.
What do you think, Justin? I'm curious about your take while I just sit back and think a bit.
In either of these two, have you been doing dialogue yet?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
And like I find it's probably the thing I redo the most, because the first pass I'll just have the characters like, vomit out everything. And then I'll come back a day or two later and realize like they don't have to say half of that. Like we kind of show that later on and this gets solved by that. So let's cut that down. And the format that I'm working in, I'm planning on having, spreads of imagery and then the text as well. So I almost want to do like all my establishing shots will actually be visual establishing shots. So I don't have to spend any of my actual text, setting the scene.
Right. And for the dear listener, that's what I've done in Automatic Age.
Yes,
I have
exactly.
page turns that are not spot illustrations. They don't illustrate something that you just read. They're the next beat of the story. So if you skip it thinking like, oh, that's just a version of what I just read, you've now missed an important detail. There's one very specific, there's an actual fingerprint in one of the illustrations that is the clue as to how the plot turns in one of the illustrations. And I had a recent reviewer say, on the third time reading the book, which was short enough that I enjoyed doing it more than once, I realized why they got caught and what it was that was found, because I was paying more attention to the illustrations. Spoiler alert. But it's a new way
they
of
don't get
doing a
caught. They
story.
don't get caught. What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Everyone's fine.
The kind
There's
of
no murderous robots anywhere.
the format you've kind of stolen without realizing that you have is it's been going on the internet for a while where somebody will post like a random awesome painting and go make up a story based on this. And so there's a whole series of these where it's just cool images, and then all these writers come and write little short stories based on the image. And so it's almost like you've taken that and
Smash those two things together.
We do that as part of our entrance exam for our program at Red River College. We give them a photo and say they have to write a short story based on the photo.
Based on the
Yeah.
photo.
So it's usually of somebody's dog. Just joking. No. But what you're thinking about when you're saying about exposition, it's just reminding me, and I'm mentioning this for two reasons. Number one, because I want to include clips from Dune in this episode, because I messed up last week's episode, and we were talking about Dune last week. But I am reading Dune. I'm reading the novel Dune for the first time. We talked about this.
About Dune.
Okay, just wait. But one thing that's really interesting about the way that novel's written is that the actual thoughts of the characters are clearly stated in the middle of a conversation. They will cut to the person's thoughts at what they're thinking about in regards to this other person, and it just opens up so much of the story that way. Like, it's just, you just get so much information, but you get it. Like, I don't mind. It's not like droning on like exposition does and all the negative things when you think about that word. I just find it so refreshing to do that, because nobody does that anymore, I don't think.
It is a very challenging thing to do well. And if you notice that Dune is a book that's quite large, it's a pretty hefty tome.
Yeah.
You couldn't pull off that sort of next track of information in a short version. Like Automatic Age couldn't do that. It would be 300 pages if I did that. If I told you what each character was thinking in relation to each situation, you'd get a very different, probably better book, honestly.
Well, depends, right?
But it depends on what your end goal is.
I was thinking about your question a bit, and flipping through my book here, and you know what I realized my really specific and practical answer to the question is, I have such a claustrophobic approach to writing. And like my stories always are like, there's one person, there's three people, they're in a room, like it's so limited in its cast and in its locations and everything, that what I realized flipping through is that I just used, anytime I have the chance to have dialogue because there's two people in a room, I'll just lean on dialogue hard. But I have so few instances in my story where I can even have a character talk to another character, because they're just not in the same location.
Because they're not in the same place. Now, why do you think that is?
It's very interesting. I never thought about it too much, but like that'll make the difference often. Is like, I like to write dialogue and like to lean on dialogue. I think it's one of the things I do a lot of. But if you flip through the stories, there's huge sections and swaths that just don't have dialogue because there's only one character by themselves. And yeah, I'm not sure where I get that kind of claustrophobic approach. You know from the project we're working on that it's the same 3-4 characters, right? Like there's nobody outside of this 5 character. There's like 2 locations, you know what I mean? One of them is basically a bunch of mist. Like it's just a very claustrophobic approach that I tend to have.
For the dear listener, Jonathan is referring to, I almost called you by your nickname there, sorry. Our personal nickname, my private pet name for you. Jonathan is referring to The Eye Collector, which is a book that we have coming out through the Heavy Metal Virus imprint this October, actually. So it's a graphic novel that he's writing and I'm illustrating, and we co-created. And yes, you do have that, but
I don't know where it comes from, though, yeah.
The idea is usually so big or scary or depressing or hurtful to the character that you wouldn't want to know that lots of other people could also have this happening. So staying close to them is a good thing.
I want them to feel trapped, and I want the readers to feel trapped with them. I think that's what it boils down to. Like most stories that I'm writing, I want the readers to feel trapped with this character, and they're close to the character, whether they want to be or not. And so sometimes I like to use close narration a lot in that way as well.
I'm going to jump over to Justin and ask him a question. Your While My Bones Burn, got it right that time, has a number of characters, and they all talk to themselves. They're all linked together.
Yes.
Sort of like through a neural link, essentially. So how are you managing what they say to each other with lots of characters in lots of different places? This is like the counterpoint to what Jonathan is saying.
I haven't quite solved that problem yet. I'm still debating like about what I want to draw and what I want to write. So I'm kind of writing it all right now. But I think when the kids are basically it's just the brains of deceased kids who have been resurrected and put into these living tanks, and they're war weapons now. And so there's everything that happens in the physical world while they're being trained, and then they're part of a network virtual reality world where they see themselves as they were when they were alive, and they have interactions in there. And I'm not sure. It's almost like I want to do the kids themselves in my style and like the real world in like your gritty style.
Right.
You know, like I want the real juxtaposition of like colorful and then like black and white desaturated.
Right.
And so I'm figuring out how I want to do that visually and how I want to do that in the actual script.
You can also use fonts and stuff like that, or italics or something like that to indicate. That's been done before, I believe, as far as like indicating a different type of dialogue.
Now, if the font varies too wildly.
Yeah, no, you don't want to like go crazy or anything.
Yeah.
Good, Jonathan, you had something?
If you want to jump back to something I mentioned before, it might be useful to think through this, because this is how I would think through this problem. So you probably will do it differently. But how I would think through a problem like that is I would think, okay, if I'm working in prose, like for me, I can't draw, so I just work in prose probably, right? And if I wanted to distinguish between 2 sections in some like extreme way, I would think through, well, what is it possible to do in prose? In prose, you can write 5 things. You can write thought, action, description, exposition, and dialogue. Those are the only things you can write in prose fiction. So I would just disallow myself. I would like split sections. So I would like have sections that maybe have only dialogue and description and action maybe, and then other sections that are all exposition and thought, for example, or something like that. Like I would start to restrict what I can write into like the different sections.
And it's interesting because once you include illustration, then you can show all of those things as well as the juxtaposition between what is present in the illustration and what is present in the text. So you get this third kind of space of meaning.
Would it be neat if you could see the characters' thought bubbles in the illustrations, but you don't have those thought bubbles in the text?
In the text, this is what I was thinking. Yeah. Or you could show, in your case, you could show the illustration of them as their, for lack of a better word, their avatars, their digital representations. And that's all you see as illustration. And everything that is the war-torn world is hidden from sight as prose. Right? So when you flip through it, it looks like a pleasant story of kids. And when you read it, it's anything but.
Teach me to throw away my comic books.
The other thing you have a real option to do as an illustrator and somebody who can design, and as a graphic designer as well, is to really think about that page layout. Like one thing because I can't illustrate and can't do anything in that direction at all, what I do a lot of is I think through how I want the page to look and how I want to arrange text on the page. Like in this novel I'm writing right now, I have a chapter where this guy has he has a dream, and his dream splits in two is the way it's described. And so I'm kind of describing two dreams simultaneously. And so what happens is the chapter opens like kind of looking normal, but then when you turn to the second page, it splits into two columns. And now it's like one dream is like running down one column, the other dream is running down the other column. You've got sort of similar things happening down these two columns of text, but it's slightly different and it kind of moves in a different direction.
I have a question related to that. I was going to bring up that page. Because it's so wild. But I think I know where that comes from. And you tell me if I've decoded the Ball philosophy. You are a poet also.
Well, I don't see myself as a poet. Like, this is the thing that's funny about me.
You've published a lot of collections of poetry that also
but I don't consider them to
as
be
books.
Collections of poetry. I consider them to be novels, with the exception of the last book. Like my first 3 collections of poetry, I don't consider to be poetry collections. I consider them to be experimental fiction, but nobody agrees with me. This is my
what
joke.
Do you know? You
my
just wrote
joke,
the thing.
My joke is that I'm a horror writer, but nobody agrees with me.
Yeah. Well, like Ex Machina is a great example of that. It's like a book that's also a machine that you can interplay. But what I'm saying about this is this notion that you have to use the space on the page any way you see fit, with words also being, in a sense, pictures, because they are telling you, when you look at that page, it becomes a picture. Even if you don't read it, you see there are 2 lines of reasoning on this page. That's a picture, right? It means that from that image, you got information, right? And then when you decode it further, it becomes this poem, kind of poetic experiment where you could read it right across the page and get a different meaning than you do if you read each column. And there's this whole jumble of dream logic just in the way you parse that section, which I think, number one, I'm amazed the publisher let you do it.
Well, they haven't
number
yet.
two, I wish we saw more like that.
This particular one I'm describing is a manuscript I'm putting together, but that isn't, published at this point. And this book has a bunch of other odder things that I can't believe they let me get away with. Like all of a sudden it jumps to it starts to jump into poetry, or at one point I just reproduced the cast list from King Lear. Guy sends it to everyone as an office memo. I think you're right on the money. Like, I like to think about the page the way a poet would think about a page when I'm working on prose. Even though I'm not designing these pages myself, I still like to at least push in that direction. And then what ends up happening is they have to, part of it is a trick. So like there's enough weird things in the Lightning Possible Storms that at a certain point, when they hand the book to a designer, they have to end up showing me like versions of it to make sure that like I know, like I approve of what they're doing.
Yeah, which bears mentioning to the dear reader. That's very rare that an author would be able to look at page layouts and be able to pick which word ended on what page. Not a thing that you normally get to do.
Yeah, and like here, like, do you like how this thing's being laid out? Like I got asked questions like that.
But it's common in poetry manuscripts.
It's more common, but I wouldn't consider it as common. I get a lot of like special treatment from my publishers because they're very good publishers. No, because one, they're just very good, but because I'm agreeable with them, and I'm not, I know how to talk in a good way to them, and I try to be nice, and I do the things they ask me to do, but I also am like very like, please let me see this thing, and then they're like, but there's always that like, but I try to build into the process ways in which I will have like influence, because they have to show me this thing because it's weird. So then they have to show me, were you thinking this?
It's interesting you say that. I ended up with a lot more editorial control over the final layout of Automatic Age for the same reason.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Because I asserted that they're not spot illustrations. You can't flow the text and then decide where it works best for page count to put these illustrations. After this word is said, this is the next image that follows it.
And you're Justin, you're thinking of stealing that idea for your book.
Yes.
Now, when you describe the story to us so far, and I can't pick up, I have to listen back and pick up on the actual words, but you're still describing this very much in visual terms. Like, I still feel like you're talking about a comic book a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's just how my brain is wired.
Which is interesting to me, because the challenge that you face is trying to convey a lot of the visuals that you're talking about in words, right? That is going to be part of the challenge that he does.
Well, and also he has this, and I know that his dad and mom listen to this podcast too. So this is me saying some nice things about your son that it's important that you should reinforce the next time you talk to him, is that he's a great writer.
Yeah.
Who never identifies himself as a writer when asked. Right? You have great turns of phrase, you have great story beats, you have the emotional cores. You often will be like, no, you got to scrap that whole part because this will make it better. Those are the actions of a good writer. And you have just become really comfortable and known for how your work visually connects. And people, get uncomfortable being famous for more than one thing. You're just going to have to get comfortable being good at both of those things.
And the reason I was talking about that is because when you describe the problem you're facing with in terms of the difference between the virtual world in which these kids live, where everything looks normal pretty much, like it's their bodies and stuff like that, like a matrixy kind of thing. And then the other world, you're speaking in terms of visuals, but how do you convey that as words? Like, you use very descriptive words to describe what it is, right?
Yeah.
How have you done that so far?
That's the fun of it, though, right? Like, figuring out the solution to those problems is the fun. Like, that's why you should write that book.
So I'm basically like writing it like a movie script right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm writing it out
in which
completely.
there are often visuals described in movie scripts to give direction.
Yeah, and
to what
I'm doing that now as part of just basically laying. I'm writing it all first before I even storyboard it, or anything like that. And so I think once it's all done, once it's all written, I'll kind of know what I'm gonna draw and what I'm gonna flesh out more writing wise.
And I mean, you have this great, with a hybrid kind of form like this, you have the capacity to say, okay, I'm only going to show you I'm only going to have dialogue. That's the only part I'm going to write, is the dialogue. That could be every couple of page turns is the dialogue, what the characters are saying to each other, and then you flip to visuals to show you what's happening, and you could flip back,
be cool.
and you could get a lot of clarity in the space between what I've seen as an image and now what the characters are saying. You could build a whole story that way.
Are all these kids from similar times? Like, are they all, when they were alive, were they living at the same time as each other, or have you developed that?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I thought this is we can, if you don't want to use this, it's fine. But I think about like
brainstorm
when they're in the they look like themselves in one world, and the other world when they're in the tanks, it should look like an Atari video game. Or
they're
something like that.
There's no expression of these mechs, like they are just gray, cold, mechanical.
But to them, they don't even have any cameras on them. They use sensors, or they use whatever to see their targets, like radar or something. So that's what it should look like.
Like the way they play their lives.
It's like they're playing a video game where they're shooting things through a scope or whatever.
It's not a terrible idea.
So we played around with that idea before, like when Greg and I were kind of story breaking this about how the kids in their virtual world, everything's censored. So as they're killing soldiers, they don't see blood and gore and guts of what's actually happening. They're seeing
they see gray sweat coming out just like Mortal Kombat.
They just like kind of de-rasterize when they killed that soldier kind of thing. It's a very filtered world that they're fed, and it's not until like something happens where they can see what they've actually done, and they can see unfiltered.
See, and there's a great phrase. See, that's the kind of thing that I would take a phrase like they de-rasterize, right? Mm-hmm. And I would not write that. I had phrases like that in Automatic Age where I'm like, I want to describe this piece of technology, but that becomes didactic. That becomes too top-down. That becomes too explanatory. I'm going to illustrate that part so that I don't have to describe it. So someone will say, oh, that's how the cars float along on the highway. I don't have to describe.
Date yourself if you use the certain terms as well.
Can also be that, but what it is it's allowing the reader to not have to slow down any more than they would need to keep up with the story. Mm-hmm. So like showing me an image of what you described on a page turn just now. That would be way more powerful than seeing the sentence.
We want to see you, Richard. We want to see you. We want to see you, Richard.
What I'm always looking for is how do I get the form and the content to start connecting in an unusual way that kind of is adding just adding something that maybe some other author wouldn't add. So like if I have like two characters, climbing into a closet and they're now cramped in the closet against one another, hiding in the closet, say, I would like describe what's happening with them in the closet, but now all of a sudden you turn the page and that's happening in a tiny little rectangle at the center of the page, shaped like a closet. Or I would like find some way. Like I'm always looking for like, how do I get the thing to look like or read like with a character, like in such a way where the character and the reader are experiencing the same thing, or the reader's getting close to the character in some way. So sometimes that's just a language issue, like you just find the right word. But other times it's like, how do you get the language to like lay on the page a certain way? Or
well, I have a story about that, about language on the page. In around 2006, maybe 2004 or 5, something in that range, I'd have to look back at the draft. I sent a draft of what is sort of like a superhero novel to a couple of agents and publishers. And I had the page turns. I would describe these big climactic battles, and you would turn the page and it would say, what I would have in the description was, the only word on this page is in the center of the page, and it says, in 10-point font, POW, with a period at the end, because the person has been struck. And I wanted to embrace that convention of the comics panel, which fills up completely with the word, and instead you have to look closely at the page and then be like, oh, that's what happened there, right? As if you were like you're approaching the whole structure of the book technology differently. Every single one of those, it was rejected offhand, and every person that rejected it said the same thing. No one will let you print a book with one word on the page like this. You might as well try to publish this as a poem.
So that's what they say. And then you go find Mark Z. Danielewski, have a massive success doing exactly that. His publisher, who published that book, specifically told him they weren't going to lay it out the way he wanted. He had to go to their offices, convince them to let him go to their office and like spend his time, not their time, sitting in an office at their company laying the book out.
Why is there such a big pushback for stuff like printing technology can do everything
because
right now?
They're so risk adverse because the margins are so small, and I get it, but that's not the way to like run an industry. And
that's not the way to make art, number one.
That's also not the way to pique people's interest. Like that kind of stuff happening on a page is interesting,
right?
Because you never see that ever.
I've polished that pitch off recently, and I've started sending it around again. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if this many years, 14 years, has changed people's attitudes about that kind of storytelling.
It's more of a trend now than it was.
Lemony Snicket did that when the kids were in the elevator shaft that was very, very dark. He then had 4 pages of just pitch black ink. Yeah.
Yeah, genius.
That stuff to me is the best. Like, I like, isn't it great when you're reading a book and you're used to things whether you realize it or not. So even if you're used to seeing a bunch of words on a page, you're used to paragraphs, you're used to all these things, and then all of a sudden you turn the page and now you're in a new space that you're not in before. This is something you haven't seen. A friend of mine likes to joke that his biggest complaint about poetry books is that he's seen all those words before. But I kind of feel like that sometimes, like it's like, well, I've seen books with characters talking to one another before. I've seen books where like reality, was stable. I've seen like a lot of this, like my complaint about, the other reason I was really trying to push certain lines in the Lightning of Possible Storms was, I'm just so sick of people writing stories like it's the 18th century.
Right. We've evolved. Can't our stories?
Yeah, like, and you know what? I've got some stories like that in there. I've got some super traditional super normal stories to prove I can do it. And, and because there's nothing wrong with it.
Wait, what do you qualify as normal?
So like a story that would have like heavy metaphor use, really imagistic, a lot of description. It's got a character and who's a child, thinking back to when he was a child.
Are we talking about canlit? Is the word you're avoiding canlit?
I've got a very canlit story in there, and I've got some sci-fi sci-fi horror in there. To me, I've got some surrealist sort of insanity. I've got some more kind of normal-ish things. To me, like my reading tastes are diverse like that, and I don't. But if I had to pick one, I would pick the weirdest story in the book. Like I've got a story. My favorite part of the story in this book is called Explosions, and it begins. Let me read you the first paragraph of Explosions. First, there is an explosion, and then another explosion. The most exciting story of all time. And you're reading it. Then you pause. All these explosions? A strong beginning, but the ending seems sure to disappoint. But it won't. And then there is another explosion. And it goes on like this.
So the whole story is a narration of the story.
Yeah, well, what ends up happening is a guy, Jonathan Ball, gets hired to take Explosions and adapt it into a Hollywood screenplay. And then Christopher Walken makes a cameo in the story because
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up.
I wanted to write dialogue like Christopher Walken. I was like, how would Christopher Walken's dialogue actually look on the page? So I thought I'll just put Christopher Walken in this story. He buys the rights to Explosions and tries to turn it into a remake of The Dark Half. It's just a wild, crazy story.
And it's short, so if you think it's really weird, it's over soon with a big explosion. I have a question. You're in your own book. How weird is that?
I'm in a couple different stories.
Know.
The first story, it goes, it's about time I made some fucking money. That's what Jonathan was thinking when he decided to write a national bestseller. If he was thinking straight, he would have decided to write an international bestseller. But he was Canadian, and Canadians dream small. Well, you know why I did that, Greg?
Why did you do it? That's what I'm asking.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. To make it short, though, on one hand, I wanted to set myself very cleanly, not in the Canadian tradition of literature, but in the American tradition, but specifically the postmodernists of the 60s and 70s American tradition of literature. And this is the kind of thing that they were very into doing. Like I see myself as doing a very specific set of things that people don't do anymore, at least not in Canadian literature, but even more broadly. I want meta fiction, but I want meta fiction that's not super clever and has a bite and a visceral edge to it. So the explosion story starts very jokey and funny and everything, but at a certain point it tips into like a horror story space, and it's very uncomfortable now to be close to Jonathan Ball and kind of to be in the room with him.
I'm glad you're on Zoom right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like I just like I'm really interested in just trying to. So anyway, putting myself in the book, I put myself in a couple different stories. There's a character named Jonathan Ball, and there's also like some moments where like I as the author start to talk directly to the reader, in part because this character Aaliyah, who's reading the book, is sort of has a connection to the author of the book that she's reading, which is sort of like the one you're reading, but not exactly like the one you're reading. And there's like moments where the book she's reading, even though it's called Lightning and Possible Storms, it gets physically described. Like the back of the book gets described, and it says, she turns and she looks. There's an author photo in the back. Well, my author photo is not on the back of this book, and so there's like a couple ways in which I'm just trying to like establish like certain connections and certain disconnections from reality, because I want to break down the boundary between fiction and what we think of as not fiction. Like to me, like that fiction reality boundary is to me the thing that needs to disintegrate.
When I got to that part,
the more I can disintegrate, the more uncomfortable it is for you.
That idea of reality, when I got to that part, my initial thought, even though I know you and I know how the book came together, I know all this kind of stuff, it creates this feeling that I'm reading a new edition of an old book. It creates this borrowed authority that there must be an edition out there, the original version of this book where the author photo is on the back, and this new edition of The Lightning of Possible Storms doesn't have it, the same way that so many books are, released as new editions with different art and stuff. It has this same kind of feeling around it. Was that on purpose? Or was it just for that twist that you wanted?
Well, it is a plot twist. It is setting up a plot twist that happens later, where we kind of realize the book she's reading, the book we're reading are not precisely connected. There's a way in which, we haven't been assuming maybe that we're reading stories that are in her book, but that's maybe not the case. So in some ways, it's just literally just setting up the plot twist, but it also is just I like that dissonance. Like I like to create a dissonance where people just are uncomfortable because they don't know what I'm going to do next. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
So anything that starts to stabilize, and anytime I get a pattern going, I want to set a pattern and then break the pattern. Like that's my trick in a certain sense.
It's easier if I'll show you, I think. Come on down.
Okay, I have a question about the book itself, or maybe your relationship with the publisher. My feeling is, if you are pitching a book like The Lightning of Possible Storms to a publisher or an agent, and you're a first-time author or you have no relationship, you will never get a book like this made. Is that true? You have a pre-existing relationship with this publisher.
Well, they published my first book 10 years ago, or 11 years previous.
That's how long ago?
Yeah, well, because they did my first book, and then I end up moving to Coach House for the other a number of other books in between. Then I had a couple other publishers for like nonfiction stuff.
Oh, interesting. I thought that your last book also came out from the same publisher. I didn't look.
No,
closely.
the last book was Coach House. So anyway, yeah. So they did my first book of poetry, or what you want to call my first book.
I would love to see the letter that you sent to convince them to publish this weird thing. I love how weird it is and how many risks it takes. But
my strategy of it is to just pretend it's normal. Or to sell it as a feature. So I'll be like, it's got this thing, and I just talked about it like it was a themed collection, or like it had this narrative thread running through it. It is a thing that does make a short story book a bit more attractive, because they can kind of talk about it almost like they would talk about a novel. But really, like this publisher, Book Hug, they're really great. Again, they were the publishers who took Ex Machina, which was rejected for years. Prior to landing with them. And Jay Millar, who is the sort of the editor, who founding editor of the press, and one of the guys who's still, him and his wife Hazel are the people who run this press. And Jay just likes weird, crazy, strange things. Like he's just, right up. I just knew like Jay will like this book. But it would be hard. I mean, I did have I had initially sent it to another publisher that, they really liked it a lot, but they wanted to do it. But, it's a short story book. And it's just the math of it is so hard to justify as a publisher. So it's tricky. I don't know what advice I would give to a person trying to publish a short story book initially. You're really like,
use a framing device.
Yeah, you have to have some.
If you can, it helps a little, but it's still, it's still the hardest thing to publish is a short story book.
Well, and that brings us around to the beginning of the conversation, in which I was going to say, and then we got sidetracked. The last short story novel, so not even a novel. Last short story book I read was a Star Wars collection called From a Certain Point of View, and they're all stories that happened around the first movie. But it's all short stories of side characters. There's like one great one about Grand Moff Tarkin and that kind of stuff, and that's the narrative thread that ties it all together. But even like.
The framing device there is $1 billion franchise.
Well, exactly, but that's not always the case, right? It can be, but it's also like maybe more established authors like Larry Niven. Whenever he published a collection of short stories, it's tales of known space. It's all things that happen within this consistent world.
See, he's coming out of that tradition where you built a backlist and you would have what maybe the dear listener is not aware of is that in the 80s, up until the 80s, it was okay for publishers to have mid-range selling novelists and what they would call like developing novelists, and they would build an audience for that person because of the way the return structures worked with books. Once it became possible for them to pulp and return books without having to pay for them, the mid-listers disappeared. That's how we got that 90s boom of, you only heard about best-selling books because you didn't hear about any other book at all because they weren't doing anything except taking them back, pulping them, and that author didn't have any more chances.
Right.
Right.
And what I was going to say, and then the other thing about it is that, for example, with Larry Niven, those short stories were all published in magazines and that kind of stuff all throughout, the 60s and that kind of stuff. So
They
that would
had
be
already
like,
done their thing.
if you'd already written a short story, send it to publication, they'll publish it, and then, we'll just reprint it in this collection.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. That's the through line, being the author. But yeah, you have to have some kind of framing device. I don't know. I've never actually, think I've ever actually read a short story book that were completely unrelated.
Framing device or not, it is nigh impossible to publish a short story collection or a novella, Gregory. So kudos to you. Those are the two things. It's easier to publish a book of poetry.
See, I did what you suggested. I just treated it like normal. I didn't call it a novella.
Yeah.
I said, here is my novel
It's
that
not
has
really a novella.
illustrations. Right?
You got to have the
it's not
swagger,
it's a
right?
short
You just
novel.
talk about it with confidence.
It's a short novel. Well, the way I've sort of slept easy about it is that if every picture is worth 1,000 words, then there's at least, 30,000 words extra on top of my word count in there. So that's,
there you go.
that fills it right out to novel length.
The fact, though, is like, as soon as you walk into the marketplace, now you got to contend with all these idiotic ideas that exist there, and none of them make any sense. They're predicated, and they're always just being disproven time and time again, but everybody's clinging to them like with an insane grip. Who knows why? Probably because the margins are so low. They're in fear for their jobs. They don't want to make the wrong move, so they're super conservative. But being conservative is not how you do well in the arts.
Yeah, people like to do things they've heard of. So like when people who don't know publishing that well or worry about like the COVID relationship to how things are going, and I bring up Dragon Nanny, and they say things like, oh, what are you doing? How are you going to do it? I now explain to those people, have you ever heard of Dr. Seuss? And they're like, well, of course, everyone's heard of Dr. Seuss. I'm like, we're just doing what he did, right? He owned his own publishing house, and he published his own books. And they're like, wait, what? Right? And because he's successful, you assume that he must have had the help of everyone else. But what he did was he had knowledge and he had a team, and he realized that there was money to be made in books if you owned the content and published that way.
Yeah.
Right? So we're just doing what Dr. Seuss used to do. And then people relax. If they feel like it's an idea they've heard of, they relax a little bit.
Yeah, so often you just have to try to act like your weird idea is not as weird as they think it is.
Until it's published,
like,
and then you
it's
promote
just
it
a
as
normal
weird.
idea. And that is exactly. But then, of course, like you would think they would somehow in their heads get through like, oh, well, Book Hug's really good. And Coach House that I work with, they're really, really great presses that have never asked me to be less weird. But like for the most part, being weird is like my business model. but everyone keeps expecting you to like try to do things like this other guy who's failing. It just is bizarre industry.
Well, Jonathan,
what's your Dune news you had?
Oh yeah, that's right. Thank you for remembering.
Yeah.
I forgot.
Oh yeah.
So
Teasing the listeners.
I have Dune news, but it's kind of like it's like a tease. It's just a tease. I shouldn't name who or where I was, but I had to pick up some books from a publisher. I had to pick up some books from a publisher, which meant I got to go to a writer's house who is also an artist. And while I was picking up those books, he was working on the covers of the new Dune comic series.
Ooh.
That has been announced from Boom, but nobody's seen what they look like yet. I got to see what those covers look like yesterday. And at first I was just like felt hurt feelings that I wasn't working on the Dune comic book, so I wasn't that interested. And then I saw them, and now, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to be great. I cannot wait to see what those are like. I think it'll be a really hard book to adapt to comics. And so I also may have a chance to see some of those interiors early. So if I can non-spoilerly and not get anyone in trouble, I'll share some of that news. But it's really cool to know that some of that's being worked on right here in Winnipeg.
That's awesome.
Right? So it's really just made me thrilled. I left there excited by the possibility, not just because I'm a fan of Dune, but like you get this into your head that cool things always happen somewhere else, right? And instead, a few blocks from my house, here's something that as a kid I would have just dream to have been anywhere in the proximity of. It's just right here down there. And it's being done by somebody I know. And oh man, so cool.
Awesome.
We have all these talented artists in Winnipeg, and I'm convinced it has everything to do with our climate. For like 4 or 5 months of the year, it's too miserable to really go out and do anything. So we sit inside and we work at our craft.
I don't like to describe it as miserable, but it's crisp.
It's crisp.
It's just cold, guys. That's all it is. And you don't go outside when it's cold. That's just what we know.
It's true.
Right? And you stay inside and you draw and you write music, and there's an incredible community here going way back. Like, it's been around for a long time. So
I think we appreciate the summer so much more because of it as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So true. So this has been Super Pulp Science, where we've talked about how genre gets made. We've encouraged you to stay weird, and we've been talking with Jonathan Ball, the author of The Lightning of Possible Storms. Join the fight and make comments.